Ah, yes, look at this. We're about to dive out for our first demonstration at the command line. And as always, we strongly encourage you to join along with us on your own systems. We're going to need both Ubuntu 1 and Ubuntu 2 up and running, and we're going to begin by working on Ubuntu 2. To understand Apache, we'll be working on Ubuntu 2 and installing Apache 2. We'll be adding to our DNS database a CNAME entry. Once we've got that record in, we can move across to Ubuntu 1 and additionally install W3M and test our DNS configuration to see that it's all working the way that we want and we can access that www server. So come on, what are we waiting for? Let's find that command line. Oh, and look at this, Ubuntu 2, a wonderful pixel playground where we're going to be working on our Ubuntu 2 server and installing Apache 2. So sudo apt install Apache 2, Apache 2 documentation. And this isn't just being a good boy here. What we want to do with the documentation is prove that we can actually use this web-based documentation from our web server itself. We're going to be able to browse the documentation on our web server. We're going to put the command line browser, W3M, we're going to install it actually on both machines, both Ubuntu 2, and later we'll put it on Ubuntu 1. Now, you can see I've got a slight typo here. We put Apache doc, so it doesn't really matter. Seeing errors is not a bad thing because it hopefully helps you understand your own errors that you might get. So it should be Apache 2 documentation. We can see now everything that is going to be installed, so I can go ahead and hit the Y key and allow that to run through. It's not particularly huge, so it should come down relatively quickly. Now that's done and dusted, if I go through and look at SS-NTL, by default we'll be listening on port 80, and true enough, we are listening on port 80. If we needed SSL, we could also enable our HTTPS port 443. But for the moment, we're happy to stay just with port 80. Having installed the browser, we can go through and look at our local host. By making use of W3M, it is a proper browser, so we're able not just to see our data, but interpret all of the HTML tags. So we can see then our page in a little bit more detail, and we can see the hyperlinks that are there. We can see the nice little layout that we've got for our Apache configuration, and we can see then that we're properly interpreting our web page. But for the moment, I'm just going to use Q to jump out of my browser and choose Y for yes. Now that was accessing the default page, but we also installed the documentation. So I can access that underneath manual and then the language that I want. So I'm just going to choose English. This is exactly the same documentation that you can find on the web, but I can then start navigating down to the documentation that I want to read. Maybe we want to go through and take a look at, say, in the user's guide, getting started. So we can move across to the getting started hyperlink and then hit enter. And we can see the getting started page. Again, once we're finished with this, we can quit out of this and choose yes. We also have a server status page, which is useful. We probably don't want everybody to be able to see this. There's no restrictions on this by default, and we don't want people, let's say on the internet, to be able to browse this sort of information. But it provides information then of the version of Apache that we are using, how long it's been up, how busy our server is, and we can then start seeing the clients that we've got connected. I'm just going to again use Q and Y to jump out of this. So we've tested then that everything is working, but we want to be able to access it using the hostname www. So I'm going to go back and take a look at my DNS files. We're going to go through then and raise our privileges and use our editor. I'm using Vim, but feel free to use whichever editor you are comfortable with. Remember, it's your environment and it's your exam if you're sitting the practical exam. So if you're better with Nano, then use Nano. And we can take a look at /etc/bind/zones/db.local. As we navigate our way down, I'm going to put in a new record, and we're going to put in a record for www.local. It's an internet record, and the record type is going to be a CNAME rather than an address record. With a CNAME, we're pointing to another host rather than resolving to an IP address. So we can put then Ubuntu 2.local and dot. Don't forget the dots if we're putting in the full domain name. If we don't put in a dot, we append the domain name to it. We should be editing the serial number. Your serial number might still be on 1, but I've been working with this a little bit, testing things, so I'm going to increment from 3 through to 4. It will work if I don't have a space at the end, but I'm just adding in a new empty line at the end, going through and saving my change, including the empty line at the end of the file. Now remember, we've now changed our zone, so we should run a sudo and named -check zone for the local zone, local dot, and then pointing through to the database file. So we can see then that that's okay. It's serial number 4, and there's no errors in that file. We can now reload our DNS server, but we don't have to reload the entire thing. So we can go through and do a sudo rndc, reload, and then the zone. So it's going to be local dot, and then the records that we want, so our internet records. What we should be able to do now is query our records, so dig, and we can look for our www.local, looking for CNAME records. Again, check that we have actually got an answer, and we can see that we are getting an answer coming back, so that is good. We can also, if we don't want to be confused by the output, include +short, so we don't get a verbose response, so it's much easier to understand in this way. Now, we've done all of the work on the Ubuntu 2. Ubuntu 2 is going to be our server that we use. So moving across then onto our Ubuntu 1 system, we can make sure that we can install our web client. So if we go through and do our sudo apt install -y and add in our browser, we can clear out of our screen, so Control and L, and then if we go through W3M, www, remember .local is our search domain, so we're able to access it just as www. So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? We can then jump out of this. So we've proved then that everything is working, that we're able to access our web server from both the Ubuntu 1 system and the web server itself. And we've been able to see that we don't just have our main web page. Installing the documentation means that we can access our manuals, and we can also see our status page through the URL server-status. Let's move back to our slides so we can look a little bit more of the configuration that's been put in place for Apache on this Ubuntu system.